Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. Conor McGregor recently did an interview with Ariel Helwani on a special edition episode of the MMA Hour. And as usual, the MMA Hour was live streamed to YouTube. And the reason this is pertinent to this video is because Conor McGregor says something in the interview that he should not have said surrounding USADA, the randomized drug testing program that the UFC has a partnership with. And Conor McGregor knew immediately he should not have said this. And after the live stream was over, he had Ariel Helwani go back and edit this out of the live stream, because you can go back and edit live streams after the fact. Luckily for you guys, somebody screen recorded it and sent it to me. And then I noticed when I went and watched the interview that it was no longer in there. And what he said was damning for himself. It was damning for the UFC, and it was damning for USADA. And if they're going to show this type of favoritism in the UFC, they might as well abolish the USADA program. Now, we're going to take a look at the edited out clip in a little bit. But we're also going to take a look at another clip from this interview that is still there. We'll take a look at that one in a second. But basically, to set up this whole scenario, you have Conor McGregor, who last fought at UFC 264 against Dustin Poirier in the trilogy. And in this fight, he broke his leg. And he's since been out. He has not fought since then. Well, last month in early February, they announced that Conor McGregor was going to be coaching the Ultimate Fighter across from Michael Chandler, and they were going to fight at the end of the season, airing on, I believe, ESPN+. And people have been wondering, when is Conor McGregor going to return to the USADA testing pool? Because if he wants to fight, he has to return to the USADA testing pool, and you need to be in the testing pool for 6 months. Well, he's still yet to be in the testing pool. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But in the interview, Ariel Helwani asked him, is there a chance that you fight twice this year? Well, it's already March. He's not in the USADA pool. There's 6 months left. I don't know if that's really possible. You know, regardless, even if he enters today, is that really possible? Well, the first clip that I'm going to show you is Ariel Helwani asking him, could you fight twice this year? Now, let's take a look at this clip. Now, this clip is still in the interview. If you go watch the interview on MMA Fighting's YouTube channel, it will still be there as we speak. So let's check out that first, and then we'll react to it.
Any chance you fight twice this year?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know, I can see it moving pretty fast when it moves. You know, we're gearing up, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes and all, but I feel it will move fast. There's no issue why it shouldn't move fast. So I assume late summer, maybe a little bit later, depending. I would like that, and then of course that's still half the year left.
So there you hear it from Conor. He would like to fight Michael Chandler in the end of summer, maybe a little bit later, and then he still has plenty of time left to get a second fight in this year. Well, the problem with that is when you leave the USADA pool, and it is believed that Conor McGregor left the USADA pool because he had to take banned substances to heal his leg. And for those of you who don't know, if you live under a rock, the USADA pool is a 365-day-a-year randomized drug testing. And what has become a trend in the UFC is fighters leaving the USADA pool, quote-unquote retiring, so that way they can use things that they necessarily aren't allowed to use under the USADA rules, and then they'll unretire and return to the UFC. Well, ever since his fight was announced against Michael Chandler, which we still don't have a date for, I'm going to give my opinion on that later in the video, but people have been wondering, okay, when is he going to re-enter the USADA pool? Because the rules are currently that you have to be in the USADA pool for 6 months before you can fight. Well, if he entered today on March 16th, that means the earliest that he could fight would be the middle of September, which would fit the timeline of 6 months. He could be in the testing pool for 6 months if he entered today. Well, the problem is he's still not entered. And we're going to look at the clip that they edited out here in a second. But if you go back, I wanted to show this. You go back to 2021. You can look up any fighter's amount of drug tests per year. You can search Conor McGregor 2020, Conor McGregor 2021. You can look up any fighter and see the number of times that Conor McGregor was tested. Now, if you look back at 2021, When Conor McGregor last fought, he was tested 11 times. Well, then you look at 2022, he was tested 0 times. If you look at 2023, he was tested 0 times. So he's still not in the testing pool, even though supposedly he's going to fight in September. And this is where it really gets interesting, because Ariel Helwani asked him directly, are you still in the USADA pool? Have you entered the USADA pool? Are you going to be tested? What's going on with that? And Conor McGregor's answer is very, very damning to the UFC. And it's basically delegitimizing the entire USADA program. And I think this is something that a lot of people aren't going to see, because now, immediately after the interview, they edited this out. Now, before I show you this clip, just know this was a screen recording, so the audio is like a little bit weird and you have the little bit of the rewind at the beginning, but this is the clip where Conor McGregor suggests that essentially he's going to get an exemption from that 6-month testing period. Let's take a look at it and then we'll react to it after the fact.
Are we back? You know, much has been made of this USADA pool. Are we back in finally? Because that's when the clock starts to the comeback, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not rushing nothing, right? So there's hurdles and whatnot, but we're in contact, we're in constant communication, and there's an interview scheduled and a meeting happened, and then it will be official.
Okay.
So, but the 6-month thing is not what they had said. Was it's 2 clean tests.
Yeah.
And off I go.
So there you hear it directly from Conor McGregor. He's asked directly, have you re-entered the USADA pool? And he says, I'm not in a rush to do anything. And the main takeaway from that clip that I want you to hear, and actually here, I'll play it for you again.
Are we back? You know, much has been made of this USADA pool. Are we back in finally? Because that's when the clock starts to the comeback, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not rushing nothing, right? So there's hurdles and whatnot, but we're in contact, we're in constant communication, and there's an interview scheduled and a meeting happened, and then it will be official.
Okay.
So, but the 6-month thing is not what they had said. Was it's 2 clean tests.
Yeah.
And off I go.
So what I wanted you to hear there was 2 clean tests and then off we go. And what I really wanted you to see there was the way when he started saying that, his head snapped over. And what he was looking at his agent, manager, whatever you want to call him, because he must be screaming in the background, shut your mouth, do not say that. Because essentially what's going on here is you have Conor McGregor, who's a superstar in the UFC, being showed favoritism. Because every fighter is supposed to re-enter the USADA pool for 6 months and have clean tests for 6 months before they can compete. And here Conor is saying, no, I don't need to do that. I just need 2 tests. Now, where does he get this idea from? Well, one, obviously, he's talking behind the scenes with the UFC saying, we got meetings and interviews and we're going to get it sorted out. And there's some hurdles and whatnot. But what he's saying is there is some language in the USADA deal that essentially says, you know, a fighter can be granted an exemption, an exclusion from that 6-month period. And essentially all they have to do is provide 2 clean samples before they are able to return to the UFC. Now, people are probably thinking, well, why does it matter if he gets that exemption from the UFC and he just provides 2 clean samples? Well, the problem with that is a massive loophole in the game, because essentially what you can do now is you can retire. You can use as much juice as you want. And again, I don't know what Conor exactly is using, but obviously by his own admission, he is using something that would not be allowed in the USADA pool. Otherwise, he would not have left the USADA pool. And essentially what fighters can do is they can abuse this loophole by pulling out of the USADA pool, abusing whatever they need to abuse, and then all of a sudden they can say, all right, well, give me a fight in a month, give me a fight in 2 months. They can provide 2 clean tests, they can cycle off, and now they can still, going into that fight, still have all the benefits that they wanted to have from using the banned substances, because they don't have that extension of the 6-month time period so that it can get out of their system. The only other case that I remember the UFC doing this for was Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt all the way back at UFC 200, and this completely backfired on the UFC. And this was another case of the UFC showing favoritism. And what happened in this case is they issued Brock Lesnar an exemption from the 6-month time period. And the reason the UFC decided to do this and USADA decided to do this is because basically they knew Brock Lesnar was on PEDs, but they knew he was a massive pay-per-view draw. And they wanted to have him on UFC 200 regardless. And if Brock Lesnar was to sign up for 6 months, his entire physique would have deflated by the time UFC 200 came down and happened, and he basically wouldn't have been able to compete. He would have looked totally different, and basically he would have ended up not fighting at all if he had to be tested for 6 months, because there's no way he would have been able to stay off of it and look the same athletically if he was on it. So essentially now what you're saying is, because Conor McGregor is a superstar, because he is a pay-per-view draw, we are going to show him essentially, favoritism here by giving him that exemption. Henry Cejudo's not given that exemption because he's not a pay-per-view draw. And this is unfair. And if you're willing to do this, if the UFC is willing to do this, if USADA is willing to do this, you might as well just abolish the whole USADA program. There was a time period, it's called the TRT period of UFC, where essentially everyone was abusing TRT. It was testosterone replacement therapy. And what happened is testosterone replacement therapy was allowed to compete as long as you had a doctor basically said you need it. And what happened was everyone was saying they needed it. Everyone was going to the doctor, going to some sketchy doctor, getting a prescription for it. And they were using it as a performance enhancer. TRT Vitor Belfort. Everyone remembers him. Then eventually the UFC and the athletic commissions realized, okay, this is a massive abuse of the system. Everybody in UFC needs TRT now. And they banned it. And next thing you know, everyone started to deflate. And this is another loophole where if you begin just letting fighters jump in and out of the USADA pool, it's essentially useless. And USADA has a history of doing sketchy things. You have the John Jones picogram thing where he tested positive and then they moved an entire event and they said it was pulsing. And, obviously they've come out and kind of defended it a little bit and said, here's the science behind it. But if you're going to have this size of loopholes, you might as well completely just get rid of the entire program and let it be the wild, wild west. What the UFC is doing, the UFC and Dana White, they do not want a clean sport. And some fans don't want a clean sport. What the UFC wants is they want an illusion of a clean sport. And if trying to get a clean sport comes in the way of a massive pay-per-view star returning, they will do whatever they need to do to make sure it does not get in the way. Does anyone, let me know down in the comments, does anyone right now as an MMA fan have full confidence that if Conor McGregor tested positive for something, that he would be pulled from the fight? Because if there's no confidence in the system, there's no point in having it. It's an optical illusion at that point. And I don't particularly have that confidence. I don't trust USADA. I don't trust the UFC, because at the end of the day, the UFC is in a partnership with USADA. The UFC is paying USADA. That is a massive conflict of interest. Now, I don't know what would be the way to do it where there isn't that massive conflict of interest, but at the end of the day, the UFC is going to give special treatment to fighters that can generate millions of dollars for them. And Conor McGregor, you saw him in that clip. He immediately knew, I should not have seen that. I should not have said this. And he looked over at his manager, and immediately after that interview was done, I guarantee they said, look, you guys have to edit that out before everyone sees it, because only the live viewers are going to see it right now. And so they decide to edit it out. Now, what do I think will ultimately come of this? I'm not sure. I don't even think a lot of people are going to talk about it. And that's the reason I decided to make this video as quickly as possible, because I don't think it's going to be talked about enough. I don't think a lot of people are going to catch it. And I think ultimately what the UFC will do, they will do whatever they need to do to get Conor McGregor on the pay-per-view card that they want Conor McGregor to be fighting Michael Chandler on. If that requires to give him an exemption, maybe he doesn't enter the testing pool until June. Maybe he doesn't enter till July. And maybe the UFC still has him fight in September. But I think that makes the USADA program essentially useless. But, it's Conor McGregor. So what is the UFC going to do? And I think this is honestly kind of embarrassing. I understand Ariel Helwani. Ariel Helwani relies on access to fighters for what he does. But for a guy that's constantly going after the UFC, constantly going at Dana White and, talking about him slapping his wife and whatnot, which obviously is wrong, I just think it's funny. He has Conor McGregor on his show. Conor McGregor slips up and basically says something that the UFC doesn't want out there. And Ariel Helwani and his team are quick to edit it out of the video so that nobody else sees it. I will link the entire interview, the entire Conor McGregor MMA Hour live stream. I will link it down in the description if you want to go check it out. What do I ultimately think happens? I think you will see Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler in September. I think it'll be UFC 292, or I believe you will see Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, which I believe will be UFC 294 in November, probably Madison Square Garden in New York. And I believe whatever the UFC needs to do, if Conor McGregor needs to keep taking whatever he's taken, and we can have a healthy debate on whether or not he should be allowed to take things that are going to help him heal his body. But let's be real, it's been roughly 2 years at this point. So at some point you are abusing the system. And I think whatever the UFC needs to do, exemption, non-exemption, 6 months, whatever it needs to be, I believe they will have Conor McGregor fight on the card they want him to fight on. And Michael Chandler isn't going to complain. Michael Chandler loves Conor McGregor more than Dana White and the UFC loves Conor McGregor. So at the end of the day, if they give him the exemption, nobody will really talk about it. Ariel won't really talk about it because the media also loves Conor McGregor because he indirectly makes them money via clicks and views, and he is good for the sport. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do? Do you care about this? I'm curious. Let me know down in the comments. What did you think of this interview in its entirety? And also, I'm very, very curious. Do you think Conor McGregor will ultimately get the exemption? And will the UFC even let it be known that he got the exemption for the USADA testing and not have to be in the testing pool for 6 months? I'm very curious what you guys think. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video, and make sure to like the video. Thank you so much for watching.